Hello. First of all, we want to thank all our men and women in uniform for serving our country, including the ones present here today. Robert Burleth, U.S. Army veteran. Jared Dartery, U.S. Army veteran. Alicia McCullough, U.S. Navy veteran. And Nick Mers, United States Marine veteran. Each year, thousands of military personnel stationed around the world leave active duty and return to jobs they held prior to entering the service, or they begin looking for new jobs. Our recent veterans report high rates of service-connected disabilities, or disabilities that were incurred in or aggravated during military service. There are other veterans, on the other hand, who leave service due to injuries or conditions that are not considered service-connected. Today, we discuss several federal laws that provide important protections for veterans with disabilities who are job searching or who are already in the workplace, such as the Americans with Disabilities Act and the Uniformed Services Employment and Reemployment Rights Act, or USERRA. But first, we want to begin our discussion by outlining some internet websites designed to assist veterans with job searching. For instance, the Veterans Employment Toolkit. Robert, tell us about the Veterans Employment Toolkit.
Sure, Mr. Ortiz. This toolkit, which can be found on the VA's website, is basically a compilation of resources related to veteran employment and services to assist employers, managers, or supervisors, and human resources professionals. It includes websites for the Department of Labor, America's Heroes at Work program, the National Center for PTSD, the Federal Occupational Health Employees Assistance Program, among others.
What is the Veterans Employment Center, and what does it provide for veterans and employers?
Well, the VEC is the federal government's only authority website used for connecting transitioning service members, veterans, and their families to meaningful career opportunities. It is the first government-wide product that brings together reputable public and private employers with real job opportunities and provides transitioning service members, veterans, and their families with the tools to translate their military skills into plain language with the goal of creating a skills profile. This profile can then be shared with employers who have already made a public commitment to help and hire veterans.
So are there any other helpful websites or resources that you might like to highlight?
Yes, I'd like to add there are numerous other resources for veterans, such as the Jobs Thesaurus, which helps find job descriptions to help veterans describe the job they had while in the military. The VEC also contains links to upcoming veterans' career fairs. VetNet is a website that contains workforce preparation and training, including its basic training track, careers connections track, and entrepreneur track. USA Jobs contains a list of all federal government employment listings. The U.S. Department of Treasury posts open positions and offers non-paid internship opportunities to wounded warriors and veterans through the Operation Warfighter and non-paid work experience programs. Now, Operation Warfighter is a U.S. Department of State program that has veterans program office and employs military spouses through the family member appointment, and also offers civilian agencies a chance to provide temporary or part-time internships for injured service members recovering in the D.C. military medical facilities. The last website I'd like to point out is the VA for Vets to help veterans with job searching and job fair posting. Now, if veterans want to start their own business, they can go to the U.S. Small Business Administration Office of Veterans Business Development website, and they can find help there.
Alicia, tell us more about what the SBA offers.
Absolutely. In addition to what Robert previously mentioned, it is important to keep in mind that the SBA also supports the National Guard, the reserves, and their military families when a small business owner is called to serve. They support them with SBA-funded programs run by the Institute for Veterans and Military Families, such as the Entrepreneurship Boot Camp for Veterans with Disabilities, also known as EBV, training in entrepreneurship and small business management to post-9/11 veterans with service-related disabilities. Additionally, the Women Veterans Igniting the Spirit of Entrepreneurship, also known as VWISE training. This offers networking and mentorship for women veterans. And lastly, Operation Endure and Grow Online. This is business training for National Guard and Reserve members their families, and business partners.
Now, how about more employment resources for women veterans? What other resources and initiatives are out there?
Absolutely. The Department of Labor created the Women Veteran Initiative to address the employment needs of women veterans with employment statistics on women veterans resources. This also includes many tips for women veterans looking for employment. There are also ways to get free coaching, mentoring, and professional counseling for women veterans, spouses, and caregivers under the Joining Forces for Women Veterans and Military Spouses and Mentoring Plus nonprofit organization. If women veterans are interested in employment with the federal government, they can refer to the Department of Veterans Affairs. The Department of Veterans Affairs has handouts with help on federal job searching and transition support for women veterans.
Right. On the topic of job searching, there are disabled veterans who, while seeking jobs and undergoing the job application process, face questions on their job applications. So, Jared, what are some questions that employers can ask disabled veterans?
Well, employers can ask disabled veteran applicants if they are a disabled veteran if the employer is seeking to hire someone with a disability. Employers generally may not ask applicants for medical information prior to making them a job offer, but they may do so for affirmative action purposes. Employers may also ask organizations that help veterans find jobs whether they have a suitable applicant for specific jobs.
What happens if an employer asks a disabled veteran to self-identify as a disabled veteran for affirmative action purposes?
If an employer asks applicants to voluntarily self-identify, the employer must clearly indicate on a written questionnaire used for this purpose, or clearly state, if no questionnaire is used, that the information requested is intended for use only in connection with affirmative action obligations or efforts. The specific information is requested on a voluntary basis. It will be kept confidential as per the ADA. A disabled veteran's refusal to provide it will not subject him or her to any adverse action, and it will be used only in accordance with the ADA. Information collected for affirmative action purposes should be kept separate from the application to maintain confidentiality.
Under the law, can veterans with disabilities who are looking for jobs within the federal government receive special consideration from agencies?
Yes, under the Veterans Preference Act, veterans and disabled veterans are entitled to preference over others in hiring for a competitive list of eligible persons and may be considered for special non-competitive appointments. Federal agencies also may use special hiring authorities, which are specific rules and regulations to hire individuals with disabilities outside the normal competitive hiring process. Sometimes it may be mandatory for a federal agency to give special treatment to veterans, including disabled veterans, in their hiring decisions.
You mentioned special hiring authorities. What are some special hiring authorities that federal agencies may use to hire veterans with disabilities?
Some special hiring authorities include the Veterans Recruitment Appointment, or VRA program, which allows agencies to appoint eligible veterans without competition. Next, the Veterans Employment Opportunity Act, or VEOA, which may be used when filing or filling positions that are permanent competitive service positions. Also, the VEOA allows veterans to apply for employment solely open to status candidates or candidates known as current competitive service employees. And lastly, the Schedule A Appointment Authority, though not specifically for veterans, allow agencies to appoint eligible applicants who have a severe intellectual, physical, or psychological disability.
Nick, how does the ADA come into play when employers give preference in hiring to a veteran with a disability over other applicants?
Well, first, it's important to keep in mind that the ADA prohibits discrimination on the basis of disability. The ADA does not prevent affirmative action on behalf of individuals with disabilities. So, for example, a private employer may hire an individual who is qualified, including a veteran with a disability, over a qualified applicant without a disability. A private employer can do this, but it is not a requirement.
Are there any specific steps that employers may make in recruiting and hiring veterans with disabilities?
Yes, there are. The ADA requires employers to make sure that the application processes, the online job postings, and recruiting information are accessible to individuals with disabilities and to individuals with service-connected disabilities. The measures that employers, especially federal employers, may make are things like including that it is an equal opportunity employer and that individuals with disabilities, including disabled veterans or veterans with service-connected disabilities, are encouraged to apply. This wording should appear on any of its job advertisements or vacancy announcements, including things like Braille and large print for their written recruiting forms and brochures. If necessary, this also includes them helping veterans with disabilities in completing applications. Sending out vacancy announcements to and asking for referrals from government, community, military organizations, and one-stop career centers that train and or support veterans with disabilities, and posting job announcements and advertisements in publication for veterans.
Can you give us an example of how employers should word their job requirements or job functions on their job applications or announcements?
Sure. So if an employer is looking to hire someone who can complete a certain job function, the employer should not detail that a person must be in excellent health or detail how a function shall be performed, but rather employers should include a description of the actual function to be performed. For instance, in a job posting, an employer should not include, "This job needs someone who can stand for long hours each day." Rather, they should say, "This job requires stocking on shelves."
That's an excellent example, Nick. Now, let's move on to our next big topic, disability and reasonable accommodations under the ADA. Robert, what does the ADA generally require of employers in this context?
The ADA Title I covers employment and requires employers with 15 or more employees to provide qualified individuals with disabilities an equal opportunity to benefit from the full range of employment-related opportunities available to others.
What is the definition of disability under the ADA?
Well, the ADA defines disability as, 1, a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activity, 2, a record of a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activity, or 3, being regarded as having a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activity. Now, substantially limits means a person cannot perform the activity or is restricted in a way that performs that activity. An individual with epilepsy, paralysis, AIDS, tuberculosis, substantial hearing or visual impairment, mental retardation, or specific learning disability may be covered. Minor conditions like sprained ankles or a broken leg or even the seasonal flu would generally not be covered. Now, major life activities are things such as communicating, walking, standing, lifting, learning, reading, concentrating, or as well as performing manual tasks or caring for oneself. This term also includes the operation of major bodily functions like the function of the circulatory, digestive, endocrine, or neurological system, among others.
So you mentioned the ADA protects qualified persons. What does that phrase mean?
Well, the Title I of the ADA protects qualified persons with equal opportunity employment. A qualified person is someone who, 1, meets a legitimate job requirement such as a skill, experience, education, or other requirement of a job that the person holds or seeks, and 2, can perform the essential functions of the job. A person will not be considered unqualified simply because the person is unable to perform a marginal job function or a job function incident to that respective job.
So if a person is qualified to perform an essential job function, except for the limitations caused by their disability, then what must an employer do to accommodate the employee with a disability?
Well, first off, laws like the ADA and the Uniform Service Employment and Reemployment Rights Act of 1994, which is called USERRA, requires employers to make reasonable efforts to accommodate the disability. A person with a disability must request a reasonable accommodation from their employer in order to do the essential functions or the important functions of their job. However, keep in mind that there are limits on reasonable accommodations. An employer does not have to provide a reasonable accommodation if it causes the employer undue hardship, meaning that it creates significant difficulty or is too much of a financial expense for the employer. undue hardship is generally determined on a case-by-case basis.
Since we're talking about job functions, what if an employer needs to hire someone to work with certain machinery? Can an employer refuse to hire someone who they think would be unsafe to work with that type of machinery?
Yes, the law permits an employer to refuse to hire a person who poses a direct threat to their own health or safety or to the health or safety of others.
What does direct threat mean?
Direct threat means a significant risk of substantial harm. In order to determine if there is a direct threat, an objective, factual review of evidence must be made regarding an individual's present ability to perform essential functions of a job. An employer cannot refuse to hire someone because of a slightly increased risk or because the employer has fears that there might be a significant risk in the future.
So what if there's an instance where an employer discriminates against an employee? What can that employee do?
If an individual feels that they have been discriminated against in violation of one of the provisions of the ADA, such as discriminated against in a job application procedure, hiring, firing, advancement compensation, fringe benefits, training, or other terms, conditions, or privileges of employment, and the individual has not been able to work it out with their employer, then the individual can file a written complaint with the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, also known as the EEOC, within 180 days of the date of discrimination.
Yes, and it's important to keep in mind that there are currently 4 EEOC offices in Texas: Dallas, El Paso, Houston, and San Antonio. For more information, you can call EEOC at 1-800-669-4000.
That's correct. And also, if individuals have an ADA discrimination claim, they can file within 300 days of the date of discrimination if the charge is filed with a designated state or local fair employment agency, such as the Texas Commission on Human Rights, which is located in Austin, Texas.
The deadline is 180 days from the discriminatory action, or up to 300 days if the discrimination occurs in a state like Texas that has a state or local anti-discrimination law. Now, if you're a veteran and you also have the option to file a discrimination complaint based on your status as a protected veteran, Jared, what is this process like?
Well, to file a discrimination complaint on one's status as a protected veteran, individuals can complete and submit a form online through the Office of Federal Contract Compliance Programs, or OFCCP. Individuals will be asked to sign the form when they are interviewed by an investigator or when completing the form in person at the nearest office to where the individual lives. Or the individual can mail a completed form to the OFCCP regional office nearest to where they live. The form is online at the Department of Labor OFCCP's website.
Are there any other additional ways veterans can file a complaint?
Yes, there is. Veterans can also file at the Veterans Employment and Training Service at the Department of Labor or the local Veterans Employment Representative at the local Employment Service Office at One Stop Career Center.
What if an individual's employer who is doing business with the federal government is discriminating against the employee in their employment or in applying for a job because of their status as a protected veteran?
Well, if an individual feels a company doing business with the federal government is discriminating against them in their job or applying for a job because of their status as a protected veteran, they can contact the U.S. Department of Labor, OFCCP.
All right, let's switch over to our last topic, and it's an important one. The Uniformed Services and Reemployment Rights Act of 1994, more commonly known as USERRA. Nick, can you tell us about USERRA?
Yes, sir. So USERRA prohibits employers from discriminating against employees or applicants for employment on the basis of their military status or obligations.
What other rights does USERRA protect?
Well, USERRA also protects the reemployment rights of individuals who leave their civilian jobs, whether voluntarily or involuntarily, to serve in the uniformed services. And this includes the U.S. Reserve Forces and State, District of Columbia, and Territory, for example, Guam National Guards.
And can you describe the difference between ADA and USERRA?
Sure. While the ADA requires employers to make certain adjustments for veterans with disabilities called reasonable accommodations, USERRA requires employers to go further than the ADA by making reasonable efforts to assist a veteran who is returning to employment. So first, if the veteran has a disability incurred in or aggravated during his or her service, the employer must make reasonable efforts to accommodate the disability and return the veteran to the position in which he or she would have been employed if the veteran had not performed military service. If the veteran is not qualified for that position due to disability, USERRA requires the employer to make reasonable efforts to help qualify the veteran for a job of equivalent seniority, status, and pay, the duties of which he or she is qualified to perform or could become qualified to perform. This may include providing training or retraining for the position at no cost to the veteran. It's important to keep in mind that USERRA also applies to all employers regardless of size.
This concludes our panel discussion. We hope you have found this video to be informative. I want to thank the panel members and thank you all for listening.